I never thought I'd be writing here, but life has a way of throwing curveballs you never see coming. I'm a 40-year-old man, married to my wife, 38, for over 18 years, and we have an 18-year-old daughter. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but nothing could prepare me for what I'm facing now. It all started a few weeks ago when I began experiencing some severe headaches and dizziness. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just stress from work. But when the symptoms persisted, I knew I had to see a doctor. After a battery of tests and scans, I got the news that turned my world upside down. I have a stage 3 brain tumor. The doctor told me I might have a year left if I'm lucky. The weight of that diagnosis is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Leaving the hospital, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. How would I tell my wife? How would I tell our daughter? I needed to get home and share this with my wife immediately. She'd gone out with her girlfriends earlier, and I hoped she'd be back soon. I called her a few times on the way, but there was no answer. I assumed she was having a good time and didn't hear her phone. When I got home, I waited. I paced around trying to gather my thoughts, rehearsing how I would break the news. Hours passed, and it was getting late. Finally, around midnight, she walked in. She seemed a bit disheveled, and when I tried to talk to her, she brushed me off, saying she was tired and just wanted to go to bed. I thought I'd tell her in the morning. After all, what's one more night? The next morning, before I could say anything, I got a call from one of her friends. She was hesitant and sounded guilty. She told me she'd been thinking all night about whether to tell me, but she decided I needed to know. My wife hadn't just been with her girlfriends. There were men there too, and she'd slept with one of them. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I hung up, not knowing what to think or feel. Was this some kind of sick joke? I couldn't process it. My wife, the woman I'd loved and trusted for nearly 2 decades, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And here I was, grappling with a terminal diagnosis. All I could think about was what to do next. I had to confront her, but I also needed to know more. I couldn't just accuse her without proof. I decided to play it cool for the time being and gather as much information as I could. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention to her behavior. She seemed distracted and was often on her phone, smiling at messages. I checked our phone bill and saw a number that she'd been calling and texting frequently. My heart sank. I knew I had to confront her, but I wanted to do it with all the facts. One evening after dinner, I told her we needed to talk. I sat her down and asked her straight out if there was anything she wanted to tell me. She looked at me with a mix of confusion and fear. I pressed on, telling her I knew she hadn't just been with her girlfriends that night. She broke down, crying and apologizing. She admitted she'd slept with a guy she met through her friends. She said it was a mistake, that she didn't mean for it to happen, and that she was just feeling lonely and neglected because I'd been so preoccupied with work and my health issues. I was furious and heartbroken at the same time. I told her about my diagnosis, thinking it might make her realize the gravity of her actions, but it just seemed to make things worse. She begged for forgiveness, saying she still loved me and that we could get through this together. But all I could think about was how I could spend the little time I had left dealing with this betrayal. I wanted to take everything from her, to make her feel the pain she'd caused me. I started making plans to secure my assets and ensure that if things got worse, she wouldn't get a penny from me. I spent the next few days in a fog. My mind was constantly racing, trying to come to terms with both my diagnosis and my wife's betrayal. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I just kept replaying the past few months in my head, trying to see where things had gone wrong. One day, I decided to take a drive to clear my head. As I drove, I thought about our daughter and how this news would affect her. She was preparing for college and had her whole life ahead of her. How could I burden her with this? But I also knew that she deserved to know the truth about what was happening. When I got back home, I found my wife sitting at the kitchen table, looking distraught. She told me she'd been thinking about everything and wanted to go to counseling to try and save our marriage. She said she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. I told her I needed some time to think about it. Part of me wanted to believe that we could fix things, but another part of me was so angry and hurt that I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what my wife had done and how it had shattered my trust in her. I also thought about my own mortality and how little time I had left. I realized that I didn't want to spend my remaining days in a state of anger and resentment. I needed to find a way to move forward, for my own sake and for the sake of our daughter. The next morning, I told my wife that I was willing to try counseling, but that it would take time for me to trust her again. She agreed, and we started looking for a therapist. In the meantime, I also started making plans for my daughter's future. I wanted to make sure she would be taken care of after I was gone. I met with a lawyer to discuss my will and made arrangements to set up a trust fund for her. As the weeks went by, my wife and I started attending counseling sessions. It wasn't easy, but we began to open up about our feelings and work through the issues in our marriage. There were days when I wanted to give up, but I kept pushing forward, knowing that I needed to find some kind of resolution. Through it all, I tried to focus on the time I had left and make the most of it. I don't know what the future holds for my wife and me, but I'm determined to make the most of the time I have left. I'm learning to forgive, not just for her sake, but for mine as well. That's the first part of my story. If you have any advice or have gone through something similar, please share. I could really use some support right now. My condition worsened over the next few months. The headaches became unbearable and the dizziness more frequent. Simple tasks became challenging. I went to several consultations, hoping for a miracle, but the prognosis remained the same. Through all this, I couldn't shake the feeling that my wife was growing colder toward me. She was distant, barely engaging in conversation, and her touch felt obligatory rather than affectionate. One evening, I broke down and told my parents everything. They took it hard. My mom cried, asking if there was any chance of recovery. My dad, usually stoic, looked defeated. I told them there was no hope, that I had less than a year left. Their pain was palpable, and it made my own heartache even more intense. They asked about my wife and whether she knew. I lied and said she was being supportive, not wanting to burden them further with the truth of her infidelity. Then, as if the universe wanted to add more salt to my wounds, my wife's friend called me again. She confessed that the night my wife cheated wasn't the first time. There had been other men, other nights. I felt a rage boiling inside me that I hadn't felt before. But instead of confronting my wife immediately, I decided I needed more evidence. I needed irrefutable proof for the inevitable court battle that would come. I asked her friend if she could get any photos or recordings. She hesitated but agreed, understanding the gravity of the situation. From that point on, I was living in a nightmare. Every time my wife left the house, I wondered if she was meeting another man. Every time she looked at her phone and smiled, I felt a knife twist in my heart. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next piece of evidence to drop, while also dealing with the physical and emotional toll of my illness. During this time, I became more distant from my wife, focusing on my daughter and my own mental health. I took long walks when I could, trying to clear my head. I spent more time with my parents, finding solace in their company. They were my rock, the only stable thing in my crumbling world. I didn't tell them about my wife's cheating. It was enough that they were losing their son. They didn't need to know he was also being betrayed by the woman he loved. One day, while I was sitting in my parents' living room, my phone rang. It was my wife's friend. She had managed to take a few photos and even recorded a short video. My hands trembled as I opened the files. There she was, my wife, kissing another man, holding his hand, looking at him with the love and affection she used to reserve for me. The video showed them laughing together, completely oblivious to the pain they were causing. I felt a mix of relief and devastation. I finally had the proof I needed, but it also made everything so much more real. My wife wasn't just distant, she was actively betraying me while I was dying. The anger I felt was overwhelming, but I knew I needed to keep it in check. I couldn't let my emotions control me. I had to think about my daughter, about her future, and about ensuring that my wife didn't get away with this. I started gathering all the evidence, organizing it meticulously. I met with my lawyer and laid everything out. He was sympathetic but also impressed with the thoroughness of my documentation. He assured me that this would be more than enough to protect my assets and ensure that my wife wouldn't benefit from my passing. As the days went by, I continued to act as if nothing was wrong. I went to my doctor's appointments, spent time with my daughter, and even went on a few dates with my wife. all the while knowing that the end was near. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, but I knew it was necessary. One evening after a particularly grueling day, I sat down with my daughter. I wanted to tell her everything, to prepare her for what was coming, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I told her how proud I was of her, how much I loved her, and how important it was for her to follow her dreams. She looked at me with concern, sensing that something was wrong, but didn't press the issue. I hugged her tightly, feeling a pang of regret for the pain she would soon endure. That's part 2 of my story. If you have any advice or have gone through something similar, please share. I could really use some support right now. Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you all for your support and kind words. This journey has been incredibly tough, and knowing there are people out there who care has meant the world to me. This part of my story might not be to everyone's liking because my departure was supposed to be graceful. But here's what happened last week. I told my wife everything I knew about her love affairs. I know it must have been foolish. I had to keep everything a secret. But it had to happen. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. One night after dinner, I just blurted it all out. I told her I knew about the other men, about the lies, and about her betrayal. She sat there, stunned and speechless. The color drained from her face, and she started to cry, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I was beyond that. After our confrontation, I decided to move out and stay with my parents. I wanted to spend more time with my family, especially my daughter. I also took her with me. It wasn't easy explaining to her why we were leaving, but I told her it was for the best. She deserved to be in a loving environment, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her. My condition has been deteriorating rapidly. I had another hospital stay last week and it was rough. The headaches were unbearable, and the dizziness made it impossible to stand. The doctors ran more tests and told me the tumor was growing faster than they had anticipated. They gave me more medication to manage the pain, but it felt like a losing battle. Each day I could feel my body weakening, and it was terrifying. One evening, I sat down with my daughter and told her the truth about her mother's partying. She took it hard, tears streaming down her face as she listened. She kept asking why her mother would do such a thing, why I hadn't told her sooner. I didn't have the answers she needed. I held her close, letting her cry it out, and assured her that we would get through this together. I still hadn't told her about my tumor. The thought of adding that burden was too much to bear, but I knew the time was coming when I would have to tell her everything. The days at my parents' house were both comforting and heart-wrenching. I was surrounded by love and support, but the reality of my situation was always looming. My parents tried to keep my spirits up, cooking my favorite meals and reminiscing about happier times. My daughter and I spent a lot of time together, going for walks when I was able, watching movies, and just talking. I cherished every moment, knowing that our time was limited. So here's what happened last week. Last week, after another excruciating headache and a bout of dizziness that left me nearly unconscious, I was rushed to the hospital again. This time, I was admitted for a longer stay. The doctors performed another round of tests and MRIs, and the results were grim. The tumor had grown significantly, and there were signs that it was beginning to affect other parts of my brain. The doctor sat me down and explained that my time was now even more limited than we had initially thought. They gave me a prognosis of 6 months, at best. Hearing this news was devastating. I had always held on to a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, there would be a way to extend my time, to see my daughter graduate, to have a few more precious moments with her. But now, that hope was gone. The reality of my mortality hit me harder than ever before. My daughter, who had been by my side through this latest hospital stay, sensed the gravity of the situation. I hadn't yet told her about the tumor, but she knew something was seriously wrong. She saw the worry in my eyes, the tension in my voice. Finally, I decided it was time to tell her the truth. We were sitting in my hospital room, the sterile smell of antiseptic all around us, the steady beep of the heart monitor, the only sound breaking the silence. I took her hand and told her everything. I told her about the tumor, about my prognosis, about how I had been trying to protect her from the truth. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she gripped my hand tightly, as if holding on to me would keep me here longer. "Dad, why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I wanted to protect you," I replied. "I didn't want you to worry." but I realize now that you deserve to know the truth. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." We sat there, holding each other and crying. It was one of the hardest moments of my life, but also one of the most important. I needed her to know how much I loved her, how proud I was of her, and how sorry I was for not telling her sooner. After being discharged from the hospital, I moved back into my parents' house with my daughter. It was a bittersweet homecoming. My parents were glad to have us there, but the reason for our move cast a shadow over everything. They tried to keep things as normal as possible, but there was an underlying sadness that we couldn't escape. Despite my deteriorating condition, I tried to make the most of my time with my daughter and my parents. We had family dinners, played board games, and watched old movies together. I wanted to create as many happy memories as possible for my daughter to hold on to after I was gone. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch, my daughter asked me about her mother's infidelity. She had been quiet about it since I first told her, but I could tell it was weighing heavily on her mind. "Dad, do you think Mom ever really loved us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I think your mom loved us in her own way, but sometimes people make mistakes. They get lost. They make bad choices. It doesn't mean they never loved us, but it does mean they lost sight of what was important." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I just don't understand why she would do this to us." "I don't either, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "But what matters now is that we have each other. And I promise, no matter what happens, I'll always be with you, in your heart and in your memories." The conversation left us both emotionally drained, but it was necessary. We needed to face the reality of our situation, to acknowledge the pain and confusion, so we could begin to heal. As my health continued to decline, my parents became my primary caregivers. They were amazing, doing everything they could to make me comfortable, to ensure my final days were filled with love and care. My daughter, too, stepped up in ways that both broke my heart and filled me with pride. She was so strong, so resilient, even in the face of such overwhelming loss. That's part 3 of my story. If you have any advice or have gone through something similar, please share. I could really use some support right now. So here's what happened last week. Of course, the court. As much as I didn't want to face it, I knew it was inevitable. I didn't have much strength left, but I wanted to finish the job. Everyone was nervous before the court, and so was my wife, but I was no longer worried. I understood what was left for me, so I already knew how everything would end. My wife found a good lawyer somehow. I don't know where she got the money from, but it doesn't matter. I was confident in myself because I had a lot of evidence. As the day of the court approached, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The betrayal, the lies, the pain, it all felt so heavy, but I knew I had to see this through, not just for myself, but for my daughter's future. The day of the court arrived, and the tension was palpable. My wife was visibly anxious, her hands trembling as she clutched her lawyer's briefcase. I could see the fear in her eyes, a stark contrast to the confident woman who had betrayed me. I, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of calm. I knew what was at stake, but I also knew that I had done everything I could to protect my daughter and myself. As we entered the courtroom, I could feel the eyes of everyone on us. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, called the court to order. My lawyer, a seasoned professional with a calm demeanor, began presenting our case. We laid out all the evidence, the photos, the videos, the phone records. Each piece of evidence was a dagger to my wife's defense. Her lawyer tried to counter, questioning the validity of the evidence and attempting to paint a picture of a marriage that was already failing. But I had anticipated this and had prepared thoroughly. My lawyer calmly dismantled each argument, presenting more evidence and testimonies that painted a clear picture of my wife's infidelity and deceit. The judge listened intently, her expression giving nothing away. As the proceedings went on, I could see my wife's confidence crumbling. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting around the courtroom as if searching for an escape. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and walked to the stand. I recounted everything, from the moment I found out about my tumor, to discovering her infidelity, to the pain and betrayal I felt. I spoke about our daughter, about how I wanted to protect her and ensure her future was secure. My voice wavered at times, but I held my composure. I needed the court to understand the gravity of the situation. My wife was called to the stand next. She tried to defend herself, saying she was lonely and that she made mistakes. She even attempted to blame my illness for her actions, saying she felt neglected and scared. But her words felt hollow. The evidence was overwhelming, and her excuses did little to sway the court. After hours of testimony and cross-examinations, the judge called for a recess. We all waited anxiously for her decision. I sat with my parents and my daughter, trying to keep their spirits up. My wife sat with her lawyer, looking defeated. I couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and relief. This was the woman I had loved for so many years, and now we were here, in this courtroom, our lives unraveling before us. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. She began reading her verdict, her voice steady and firm. She acknowledged the pain and suffering caused by the infidelity and deceit. She praised the thoroughness of our evidence and the validity of our claims. In the end, she ruled in my favor. My wife would not receive any of my assets, and I would have full custody of our daughter. The relief that washed over me was indescribable. I had fought hard for this, and now, finally, it was over. My wife broke down in tears, her lawyer trying to console her. But I couldn't focus on that. I had to think about the future, about my daughter, and about making the most of the time I had left. After the court ruling, I took my daughter to stay with my relatives for a while. I wanted her to have some semblance of normalcy, to be surrounded by family who loved her and would support her through this difficult time. She was strong, stronger than I had ever imagined. But I knew this was taking a toll on her. Many people asked me about various details, wanting to know everything that had happened. I don't describe everything in detail, but I hope you caught everything. This journey has been incredibly tough, and knowing there are people out there who care has meant the world to me. That's part 4 of my story. If you have any advice or have gone through something similar, please share. I could really use some support right now. It's been a couple of days since my last update, and my condition is unclear, so I'm writing now so I don't die tomorrow. My wife called me and just annoyed me with a lot of aggression. I don't know where my wife is now, and honestly, it's not interesting to me anymore. My focus is solely on spending the last months of my life with my family. I understood that my daughter needed to know the full truth, because I saw how she suspected there was something more that I didn't want to tell her. It was difficult, but I managed to tell her everything. There were many tears, but I believe she will endure. One evening after dinner, I sat her down and looked her in the eyes. I told her about the tumor, about the prognosis, and about how I had been trying to protect her by not telling her sooner. She cried, sobbing into my chest as I held her. It was the hardest conversation of my life, but it was necessary. She needed to know, and she deserved to know. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" she asked through her tears. "I wanted to protect you, sweetheart," I replied. "I didn't want you to worry, but I realize now that you needed to know the truth. I'm so sorry." We sat there for what felt like hours, holding each other and crying. It was a moment of profound pain, but also of profound love. She knew now, and she understood, and while it hurt her deeply, I could see a strength in her that I hadn't seen before. She was resilient, just like her old man. As the days passed, we tried to make the most of our time together. We went on little adventures, visiting places we loved and creating new memories. We laughed, we cried, we talked about everything and nothing. It was bittersweet, knowing that our time was limited, but it also made each moment all the more precious. I understood that the day would come when I would be gone, and my daughter would be alone with my parents. It was hard to accept, but I knew she would be in good hands. My parents loved her dearly and would do everything in their power to support her and help her through the difficult times ahead. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I told her how proud I was of her. I told her how much I loved her and how much she meant to me. I wanted her to know that even when I was gone, I would always be with her in spirit. "Promise me you'll follow your dreams," I said, holding her hand. "Promise me you'll live your life to the fullest and never let anyone hold you back." "I promise, Dad," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "I'll make you proud." I have no doubt that she will. She is strong, brave, and full of potential, and while it breaks my heart to leave her, I know she will be okay. She has a bright future ahead of her, and I have faith that she will achieve great things. As I write this, I am filled with a sense of peace. I have done everything I can to protect my daughter and ensure her future. I have fought hard, and now, as my time draws near, I can rest knowing that she will be okay. To all of you who have supported me through this journey, thank you. Your words of encouragement, your advice, and your kindness have meant more to me than you will ever know. You have helped me through some of the darkest moments of my life, and for that, I am eternally grateful. In life, it's important to take care of your loved ones, but also to take care of yourself. Don't neglect your own needs and well-being. Cherish the moments you have and make the most of the time you're given. Life is short and unpredictable, so live it to the fullest and love deeply. This is the end of my story, but it is not the end for my daughter. She has a long and bright future ahead of her, and I know she will carry on with strength and grace. Thank you all for being a part of this journey with me. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and moments I will forever cherish. We visited the beach, one of our favorite places, and I watched my daughter play in the surf, her laughter ringing out over the waves. We had a picnic in the park, under the shade of an old oak tree, and talked about the past and the future. Every moment felt like a precious gift, and I soaked up each one like a sponge. As my health continued to decline, my parents took on more of the caregiving duties. They were amazing, doing everything they could to make me comfortable and ensure I had everything I needed. My daughter helped as well, showing a maturity and strength that filled me with pride. She was my rock, my reason for fighting each day. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my life, thinking about the choices I had made, the paths I had taken. There were regrets, of course, but there were also so many moments of joy and love. I thought about my wife, the woman I had loved for so many years, and the betrayal that had shattered our lives. It was hard to reconcile the memories of the woman I loved with the actions she had taken. But I knew I had to let go of the anger and focus on the time I had left. One afternoon, as I lay in bed, my daughter came to sit beside me. She held my hand and looked into my eyes, her expression filled with love and determination. "Dad, I've been thinking," she said softly. "I want to start a foundation in your name to help families going through similar situations. I want to make a difference, just like you've always told me to." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at her, so proud and filled with love. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. I couldn't be prouder of you." We talked for hours about her plans, her dreams, and how she wanted to honor my memory. It was a conversation filled with hope and love, and it gave me a sense of peace knowing that she would carry on my legacy. As the days turned into weeks, my condition worsened. The pain became more intense, and the medication was less effective. But through it all, I was surrounded by love. My parents, my daughter, and even old friends who came to visit all provided a sense of comfort and support that made the pain bearable. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the room, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I knew my time was coming to an end, but I was at peace. I had said my goodbyes, made my peace with the past, and was ready to let go. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I closed my eyes, surrounded by love and filled with a sense of peace. I knew that my daughter would carry on, strong and resilient, and that my legacy would live on through her. And so, this is the final chapter of my story. Life is unpredictable and often filled with challenges, but it's also filled with moments of joy and love. Cherish those moments, hold your loved ones close, and never take a single day for granted. Thank you all for being a part of this journey with me.